Alrighty everyone, welcome back. Given that we have Celebration and D23 this year, serving as the two big events that's going to have a lot of major announcements related to the Star Wars franchise, we also have Bob Iger that's going to unveil quarterly earnings calls, that some of which will actually include some announcements related to the upcoming Star Wars shows, Star Wars projects, and a lot more on the horizon by John, George, and Dave. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future Star Wars updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you all so very much for the great and kind support. Now, given that Bob Iger is really reorganizing his strategy towards Star Wars by focusing more strictly on quality-driven projects and also lessening the cost of said projects by a little bit, not by much, to also kind of save on their budget. Now, we know that they're really investing a lot of their time on backing off on really relying on CGI and computer-generated technology and stuff around those lines to really kind of focus more on practical effects again and to really kind of take advantage of that too. Now, we know that Star Wars, as of right now, is heading toward the theaters again. Basically, Bob Iger and his approach is to bring Star Wars back to cinema, alright? Mainly speaking, of course, where Star Wars shows will eventually become more or less of a supplement or kind of serving as an additional piece on the side to kind of fill in the gaps. Now, with that being all put out there, one very exciting thing has a lot to do with Bob Iger's new approach to the franchise, and exactly how a lot of this has a lot to do with the upcoming films and his overall stance on George Lucas and a whole lot more on top of that. So let's dive into exactly what this really entails. Now, one thing is that now that Bob Iger is setting up various meetings with new creators and existing ones like John and Dave, they are laying out the groundwork for the ever-evolving roadmap of Star Wars right now. Now, just recently, Bob Iger made a big adjustment on the creator end of things. Further, it's noted that Disney recently actually hired George Lucas to take part in a new sequel trilogy that is currently in the early development stages that will eventually open in theaters. Disney is said to have hired George Lucas as a co-writer for the upcoming films that will feature all the characters from the Mandoverse era and will serve as a post-Return of the Jedi era trilogy that's also being dubbed as a new sequel trilogy or a new attempt at sequel era films. The idea was first introduced by John and Dave and has now been finalized behind the scenes over at Disney, and how he, of course, does not want to make any official announcement until sometime by this fall or early 2024 about the said films. So let me just stop here for one moment. Now, we know that Bob Iger has learned about the damage that they have done by prematurely announcing Star Wars projects. This was mainly done, by the way, by Kathleen Kennedy making that big mistake of announcing said projects too fast and really doing the wrong thing there. You know, we know that Bob Iger is the one that really closed the lid on allowing Kathleen Kennedy to do that anymore, and basically all of her initial projects are falling apart. The Kevin Feige Star Wars movie has been cancelled, Patty Jenkins' Star Wars movie is dead, and Taika Waititi's movie is not looking good right now. So basically they're doing a big reorganizing phase right now by initializing all these different movies for the new sequel trilogy movies that's also known as the Mandalorian Trilogy, if you want to call it that, because it's going to involve all Mandoverse era characters and characters from the Ahsoka Tano series. So on top of this, alright, what's really exciting though is how they are in the process of hiring George Lucas as a co-writer for these new sequel trilogy movies, and how he's going to have a lot of power over the simple direction of these new Star Wars films, and how he's going to become an advisor as well on how it should all be done. Now, basically, what their approach is that this is going to be a live-action adaptation of the Thrawn trilogy with some new material thrown in there as well. Now, on top of this, what's even all the more exciting is exactly what they also have planned in the cards right now about who is, of course, going to be the main villain, or who the main villains are going to be in these new sequel trilogy era movies. Now, this is not to say that these are going to be new episodes, 7, 8, and 9. Basically, they're treating them as a new sequel trilogy because these are also post-Return of the Jedi era films. Moving on. Now, the budget of these movies are said to be slightly less than the big budget films of 7, 8, and 9, but not by much, and are aimed to be very quality-driven movies that will involve creators like George, John, and Dave as co-writers, along with a main writer that Disney is currently on the hunt for. These new sequel movies are said to feature Thrawn and a new Dark Jedi as the main villains of the new films, and will heavily be inspired from the Thrawn trilogy books from the 1990s. This conflict will also be teased in the upcoming Ahsoka Tano series that's set to debut by this fall, and will also include characters like Ezra Bridger and Sabine Wren on the big screen to star in these big-budget Star Wars films. Now, before I get to the last piece about this, we know that Ezra Bridger is going to be portrayed by actor Iman Esfandi in the upcoming Ahsoka Tano show, and we also have Sabine Wren as a main character. And not just that, we also have Era Syndulla. So basically what they're doing is that Star Wars Ahsoka is going to be the prelude to these new sequel-era movies. That's going to basically be post-Return of the Jedi content on the big screen again, except well before the events of Episode 7, The Force Awakens, if that makes sense. Now, the great thing about this, too, is that this is going to allow them to really kind of bring those characters onto the big screen on a big budget. So it's going to have a big budget look, it's going to have that more cinematic style to it all. And sure, they did that with Andor, but they want to do this also with the Ahsoka series and kind of put that on the big screen, how that could really work. So that's Bob Iger's big plan right now with the upcoming Star Wars films, now that more slots are really getting opened up with all the cancellations. On top of this, additionally, the plan is to also bring back Grogu and Din, as well as Luke Skywalker, to the big screen in these movies again, using this particular method. So, I don't know about you guys, but we have talked about this before a couple of times throughout the course of this year and the end of 2022, but these new sequel trilogy movies I think are going to be brilliant. I think it's a great idea to really kind of bring already established characters on the big screen and familiar faces, while also kind of introducing new ones. How Thrawn and this new Dark Jedi are going to be the main villains of the sequel trilogy movie era, of course, I think is a perfect plan of theirs, and how the Ahsoka show, like I said before, is going to be a prelude to all of this. It's going to be like a little teaser of these new films that they're currently in the process of developing. So, I think at the end of the day, the fact that they have George involved as a co-writer is a great addition. They just need a main writer right now. That's all they're really looking for. That's the big hunt by Disney, and that's what they're trying to obtain. So anyways, guys, fill me in below in the comments what you all have to say about this, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel. I thank you all so very much for the kind support, and I'll catch you guys next time.
From night to moon, we